Hi students, welcome back. Please excuse the messy backgrounds this time. Today we are going to talk about a film called Matilda. Matilda is actually a pretty old film that was released in 1996, directed by Danny DeVito and mainly starred by Mara Wilson, Beth Davids, Danny DeVito himself, and Rhea Perlman. Matilda is originally a children's book by British author Roald Dahl. Roald Dahl is often praised as one of the greatest children's books authors in the 20th century. Some of his other important works include Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, Fantastic Mr. Fox, and the BFG, which all of them have been adapted into movies before. His works often feature children protagonists with adults as villains. Back to Matilda, in addition to being adapted into a movie, it has also been made into a musical in 1990 in the United Kingdom and has been on tour in many different countries. I think it is currently the stable show in the West End of London, which you can watch if you've ever visited London. The story of Matilda is about this girl as a protagonist who is obviously named Matilda. Since her birth, she was neglected and mistreated by her family, which include a fraudulent father, a gambler mother, and a brother who was not so important but who is also very mean to her. So she is very different from her family. Her family, as mentioned previously, they are not good people with decent jobs, and they always watch TV after dinner, during dinner, and almost like anytime you see them. However, Matilda is different as she loves to read, and she has to depend on herself ever since she was 2 years old and has been looking for books on herself in the library when she was starting from 4. So when Matilda was 6.5 years old, her father, Mr. Wormwood, somehow met a school's headmistress, Miss Agatha Trunchbull, and therefore she was sent into school, which was looking forward to for a long time. However, the headmistress, Miss Trunchbull, is a really horrible person. She dislikes children and has cruel and appalling ways of punishing them. However, lucky for her, she has befriended not only her classmates, her schoolmates, but also her homeroom teacher, Miss Jennifer Honey. While Miss Jennifer Honey admires Matilda's intelligence and her talents, Matilda also got the chance to find out her secret relationship with Miss Trunchbull and her tragic childhood. Also at the same time, under the suppression of both her family and Miss Trunchbull, Matilda discovers her hidden talent of being able to move things around remotely without having to touch them. So eventually she defeats Miss Trunchbull with her secret power and regains justice for Miss Honey, and even got to leave her original family and was adopted by Miss Honey. Therefore, eventually they lived happily ever after. So that's the story of Matilda, and there are 3 main points that I would like to talk about regarding the story of Matilda. First of all, since this is a children's book, I think it does praise certain behaviors. The most important one is that the story encourages reading. As we know from the previous summary, Matilda is a girl who loves to read, and I do think that reading empowers a person is a important concept that the story wants to convey. So not only does reading empower a person in the story, like how you're able to discover your hidden talents or superpowers, but on a more practical or a more realistic level, we know that through reading you would become more knowledgeable, more intelligent somehow, and that you would be able to make decisions for yourself. So as mentioned previously, Matilda got to left her home and was adopted by Miss Honey. Actually, she made all these decisions herself, and she finds the ways to make these decisions. So I would think that by doing so, like by her large amount of reading and thinking, she actually, on a larger level, she has chosen a future for herself. She is not passively waiting for her parents to tell her what to do, but she is actively making a decision to actually leave them and choosing a better future for herself. So secondly, I think this movie is pretty politically correct in 2 different senses. First of all, I think it praises individualism, like it celebrates each individual's uniqueness. So in the film, we can see that there are several different incidences in which Miss Trunchbull picks on different students. They include a chubby boy and I think a girl with pigtails, as well as glasses. However, although these students, they are being bullied by the headmistress, none of these bullying events occurred actively by students, or even the students did not participate in the bullying by Miss Trunchbull. Instead, they actually stand together and they encourage each other and they help each other out in these incidences. This leads to the second point of equality. So the film does not only praise or emphasize the importance of equality between children, but also between people as people, like human beings. So as mentioned previously, children actually stand together when they are being picked on or being bullied by Miss Trunchbull. So as mentioned previously, there are a lot of students, of course, in the school, and they of course come in all different shapes and colors. For instance, there are more chubby boys or there are more bony girls with braids, and there are students obviously from different racial backgrounds. However, the students do get together pretty well. We don't see fights between students based on one's figure or one's cultural backgrounds. What we see is that they get along with each other and it's a pretty harmonious environment, while the turbulence is all caused by the adult Miss Trunchbull. So we see that there is this importance of equality between children, and there's also the equality between human beings that was being emphasized. So there's this line that was being said by Mr. Wormwood, Matilda's father, earlier in the film and was repeated by Miss Trunchbull later in the film. So they both said, "I'm big, you're small, so I'm right and you're wrong." However, as the story develops or whenever they said it, it's clear to us audiences that in that current situation, right or wrong is not dependent on your relationship with the child, or it's not dependent on your figure or your gender. So later on, we do see a certain form of revenge from children to the adult. I don't think this is like encouraging children to go against their parents, but it's more emphasizing how justice or simply the decision between something is right or something is wrong is not dependent on one's social position or one's figure or age. It's simply dependent on whether one is doing the right thing or not. That's it for the second point. So thirdly, I would like to talk about the portrayal of villains, which are, I do think they're similar to some of the Disney villainesses in like previous Disney films. Obviously, the villains in this film is Matilda's parents, Mr. and Mrs. Wormwood, and the school headmistress, Miss Trunchbull. However, if we focus on the female villains, which are Mrs. Wormwood and Miss Trunchbull, we do see that their features go to two different extremes. As we can see regarding their figures and their appearances, they're in the sense of extreme in which Mrs. Wormwood is a really feminine person, while Miss Trunchbull rarely has any feminine traits on her. So if we think about the Disney villainesses, for me, Mrs. Wormwood is sort of like the villainess in 101 Dalmatians, Cruella de Vil. They're both very bony and they all wear those exaggerated costumes, while Miss Trunchbull is more similar to those villains who have a more androgynous appearance, such as Ursula and the Red Queen. They all appear in a more bulky figure and they might even look a bit like men. So I think that's just a pretty interesting observation of mine of how probably the Western world or how Disney or British authors or British filmmakers tend to shape their female villains. So that's it for today's video, and as always there are 3 questions before we end. The first one, who is the author of the original work of Matilda? What are some of his other works and why is he important? Secondly, what is the story about? Who was the protagonist and who are the villains? The last question, please share your thoughts on one of the 3 observations mentioned earlier. For instance, do you agree or disagree, or do you have other thoughts or reflections on the 3 points mentioned above? So that's it. Thank you for being here today as always, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.